Hi everyone, Susan Storm here. Hopefully this is streaming all right. It's my first time doing a YouTube live stream. I am waiting on Denzel. He's just being held up just a moment. So I am really excited to be able to talk about introverted feeling, one of my absolutely most intriguing cognitive functions, at least in my mind. And we're gonna have a lot of fun taking your questions about introverted feeling and really diving deep into what this function stands for, because there are so many misconceptions about introverted feeling that I'm constantly seeing in the type community and even hearing about in my emails. Hello, AJ. Nice to have you here. Hi, Jack from World Socionic Society. Hi, Lexi. Thanks so much for being a part of this. We're really excited. I know Denzel's excited. He's just running just a teeny bit late. And I'm really excited to dive into introverted feeling with you. We have some slides to make it a little bit easier to just digest the information. And I really want to hear your questions about introverted feeling. And then next week, we are going to dive into extroverted feeling. So we're just going to give everyone a couple minutes. We're going to give Denzel a couple minutes to get on and a couple minutes for other people to log on. Hi, Dee. Nice to have you here. Um, so one of the things that I'm always hearing about introverted feeling that I think is kind of a very, very big misconception is a lot of people think introverted feeling is just about what I want or what someone feels emotionally. And so I'm excited to explore how it's not just about being selfish. A lot of people, they say, well, introverted feeling is selfish and extroverted feeling is caring. And that's one of those stereotypes and those misconceptions that we're going to hopefully, um, what's the word, disassemble today. And hopefully it will, that misconception will be used less. Um, Thanks so much for being here. I'm happy to see you, Syed. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I'm still hanging on for Denzel, but if it, we'll give it a couple minutes. If he's not available yet, then we will just go ahead and move right on. Hi, Tatiana. Thanks for joining us. I'm really happy you're here. And for anyone joining us on Facebook, I'm hoping to stream this also on Facebook. So for anyone joining us on Facebook, thank you for joining us and being part of this. This is going to be an 8-part series. So we're starting with introverted feeling. Next week's extroverted feeling, and then we're going to do introverted thinking the week after that, extroverted thinking, and then we're going to get into the perceiving functions. So introverted sensing, extroverted sensing, introverted intuition, and extroverted intuition. And I really think there's going to be a lot of fun insights, and I like the interactivity of doing live streams. To me, it's a lot more fun than doing a recorded video that has to be edited and made perfect. I may later on wish I had explained something a little bit differently, but I like the spontaneity of a live session. So, all right. D, if you subscribe to our YouTube, then you should get a notification if we are going live. I am going to go ahead and jump on with a basically a short introduction to what introverted feeling is. Let me go ahead and put up some slides here that I created. Um, awesome. If any of you can see this, can you please give me just a little thumbs up or let me know? Because this is my first time using StreamYard and to stream these slides, and I just want to make sure they're working all right. So introverted feeling, that's what we're diving into today. If you are a feeling, perceiving personality type, then introverted feeling is your most valued decision-making function. If you're a thinking, judging type, it is your second most valued decision-making function after extroverted thinking. Introverted feeling is a judging function. So intuition and sensing, these are perceiving processes. These are ways that we absorb information from the world around us. Feeling and thinking functions are judging functions. So they're functions that we use when we're trying to narrow down our decisions and trying to make evaluations. So judging functions aid in making decisions. I know this is a little repetitive, evaluating information, prioritizing value, when you make should statements, then you're using your decision making function to do that. And it's a big part of how we form our worldview. So again, the types who value introverted feeling are the ISFPs, INFPs, ESFPs, ENFPs, INTJs, ISTJs, ENTJs, and ESTJs. And if you're watching this and you're like, well, how does this show up for me? Maybe you aren't even one of these personality types. Then we can get into that a little bit when we get to the Q&A part of this session, because everyone uses introverted feeling. There isn't a single person who doesn't use one of the 8 cognitive functions. Hi, Denzel. Denzel's here. Let me see. Can you hear? We can't hear you yet. Let me see if maybe I need to do something. Let me see here. I don't think I need to do anything on my end. It looks like you're muted. Hmm. Let's see here. Let me try muting you and unmuting you. Still not hearing you. It always happens sometimes on these streams where technological glitches just happen. So yeah, if you're watching this and maybe you're an ENFJ, then Denzel is also an ENFJ, and he can maybe speak to how introverted feeling shows up for that personality type. If you're an INFJ or an ESFJ or an then let us know if you have a question about how introverted feeling might be showing up in your life, because a lot of times we say, oh, well, these types are the only ones who use introverted feeling. It's only the feeling perceivers and the thinking judgers, when in fact, we all use introverted feeling. All right, Denzel, let's see if I can get you.
Is it working now?
Yes, we
Okay,
can hear you now.
gotcha. Sorry about the wait on all of that. Yeah, uh, something was running a little bit later on my end, but I'm excited for this.
We're excited to have you here. If you don't know Denzel, you probably do, but if you don't, he is a YouTube streamer and a typology expert. He has taken the personality hacker training program, and he is the guy I trust when I need someone to get an accurate profiling session. So I've sent my couple of my teenage kids to him to get profiled. I've sent friends to him. So he's an excellent, excellent profiler and really knows his stuff when it comes to typology. So, and also he is the extroverted feeler of our group here. I have INTJ preferences. It's been a big mess, me trying to clarify my personality type over the last year. I will be uploading a video about that this week. But so I have introverted feeling, and Denzel has ENFJ preferences, so he has extroverted feeling. So we're going to be able to get a little bit of both perspectives on the introverted feeling process here. Hi, Lexi. All right, Denzel, are you ready to hop into the subject?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome. So we're just talking about, as you can see from the slide, we're just talking about the different personality types who use introverted feeling. I explained that all 16 personality types use introverted feeling, but these 8 are the ones who have more certainty around it than the other 8. It's more conscious for them. We're just going through a little brief overview of introverted feeling, what it is, how it shows up.
Yeah. All right, sounds good.
My slides are going like super slow here. Hang on a second. Oop. Okay, so how introverted feeling helps with decisions and evaluations. So introverted feeling is what you use when you ask, does this feel right to me, or am I being authentic? So sometimes when you're in a social situation and there's a lot of vibes going on, there's a lot of different feelings and emotions and interpersonal dynamics going on, introverted feeling is the part of yourself that is asking yourself, am I actually being sincere and authentic to who I really am, or am I going with the flow a little bit more, or am I putting on some kind of hat that I need to wear to keep the social momentum going? It's the part of you that assesses, how you feel about something on a scale from I hate something all the way to I love something. It's how do I feel? What's my personal evaluation of this? Um, Introverted feeling understands how a decision, word, or experience will impact the unique subjective human experience. So, to contrast that with extroverted feeling, which is what feeling judgers use, extroverted feeling is very concerned with like the collective human experience, how everyone is doing, and what the group dynamics are. This doesn't mean that feeling judging types don't care about individuals or the subjective human experience, but they're very tapped into how every single person in the room is impacting everyone else. And introverted feeling is much more focused on the individual in the experience. Denzel is an extroverted feeling type. Do you have any thoughts on this? Denzel's also married to an introverted feeling dominant type. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'm married to an ISFP. Um, I literally call her the FI sensei. I know that in the type community, hopefully it's a lot less now, especially with your articles coming out all the time now, Susan. But I know that in the type community, like censors get like a lot of like hate. And I just, I always think about how, a lot of the people who look down on censors, if they were to meet my wife, Jamila, they'd be like, are you sure you're not an intuitive? Because it's just yeah, like a lot of what we see online about sensors it's just not always really reality. But yeah, Jamila, my wife, she's FI sensei, as I call her. And it's just wizardry. Like how deep everything for her goes, like to the like she has to understand the why, and I think it's combined with the FINI. So like for her, like she has to understand like the why behind everything of how she feels. Like even if it's something as simple as oh Denzel, like are you craving, like do you want pizza? I'm like, oh, I'm not really craving pizza right now, Jamila. And then she's like, oh, why not? I don't know. I just don't crave pizza right now. Like, do you think about that? She's like, yeah. Like, I like, oh, why am I not craving pizza? I don't even understand why somebody would waste their time to do that. But yeah, like it could be from something as quote unquote insignificant as that to like really deep things. And the biggest things that I've seen with FI is, and I don't want to get ahead of everything, but I feel like what I've noticed the most is how deeply understanding the nuances of their own emotions and their own values and things of that nature allows them to also understand other people's the nuances of like other people's emotions and their motivations and things of that nature. And I really really respect that, because uh it's it's a way for them to be able to continue to relate to other people. And I always just think of that whole thing like, you have to put on your mask before you're able to help somebody else to put on theirs. And my wife is just so good with boundaries, for example, and like knowing like, no, this is how much is being stripped away from me, so I'm not going to engage in this dynamic, or I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. And I'm just like, wow. So I learned so much from her. And I have an INFP younger sister. One of my best friends, actually a few of my close friends are INFP. Shout out to Caleb if you're watching. And then my friend Albany, she's an INFP. So yeah, just yeah, that like FI is wizardry. I'll just say that, and like not having it in my immediate stack, I see the value in it a lot, even with like lower stacked FI. I've been seeing that a lot recently as well. So
Thank you, Denzel. I really appreciate that. I love talking to him, and I love spending time with his wife, Jamila. We've been friends for a long time, and completely agree that introverted feeling, or FI, that's if you hear us using the word FI and you're like, what does that even mean? That's just the short code for introverted feeling. Introverted feeling, when it's in a dominant or auxiliary position, can definitely look like wizardry to those of us who don't have it. We're like, what in the world? How do they understand things so deeply, so um, with so much nuance? And this that brings us to the current slide we have now. A lot of people think that introverted feeling is just about emotions. If you look at a lot of like INFP memes and INFP content, you'll see these like crying emojis. You'll see lots of things that imply that if you are an INFP or an ISFP, you're just always crying about everything. And there's this misconception that introverted feeling types are hyper emotional and hyper reactive. And actually, I mean, this can be true for some IFPs, but it's definitely not the norm. Introverted feeling is not just about emotions because we all have emotions. Whether you're a thinking type or a feeling type, extroverted or introverted feeling, we all have emotions. What introverted feeling does is it focuses primarily on conviction, personal conviction. And it can do this in ways that do not look like feeling. This Someone with introverted feeling can be the person at the Thanksgiving dinner who puts their foot down and points out the elephant in the room because they feel like it needs to be said. Introverted feeling can make great sacrifices to stay true to itself, to stay true to someone's core values and beliefs. So it's not this weepy, emotive, kind of almost weak um, joke that's been made of it a lot online. Although, like I said, there's people of every type who can be that way. And we'll get into a little bit of how unhealthy introverted feeling can look. But introverted feeling at its best is focused on personal conviction. What feels right to me? What am I willing to die for? At the end of my life, what do I want to look back on and see was the most important thing? This is what introverted feeling is focused on. And so it's really a lot richer than a lot of the online content would have you believe. So, common features of introverted feeling include holding private, non negotiable values. So, introverted feeling types, you may not know what their values are all the time. They're not always walking around with a flag or a sign that's like, here's what I believe, even though a lot of times they, I think people think of like social justice warriors as being like introverted feeling types. Their values, you may not even know what they are because they don't just go around pushing them on other people unless, I mean, in certain situations they can, but it's going on more on the inside. It does not tolerate violations of its core values. So this is when you might see an introverted feeling type holding up a sign or protesting, is if if their value is threatened. If they're just having a casual conversation with people and there's no reason, then you might not know what it is. They relate well to people one on one. They crave inner harmony. So the whole concept of what is right to me, what's true to me, what's authentic to me is about having inner harmony and living in alignment with what you believe is right. So when you're doing that, you're having inner harmony. All the inner voices that you have going on inside yourself, you've gotten them to align into a harmonious mix of voices. Um, Introverted feeling focuses more on individuals than the collective. It is concerned with individual rights, um, connecting with people as individuals rather than speaking to large swaths of people. And it assesses motivations more than presentation. So sometimes how this can show up. I'm a have introverted feeling in my function stack, and my husband has extroverted feeling in his function stack. And one thing that we notice constantly when it comes to parenting is one of our children could do something wrong. And I'll be like, well, their motivation was okay. Their intent was good. So I'm not too worried about it. And he'll be like, but the behavior was not good. And we'll get into these little kind of discussions about, well, intent versus behavior. And extroverted feeling is very concerned with how one person impacts everyone else on a large scale. And introverted feeling cares about that too, to some degree. But a lot of times, what introverted feeling is mostly zoning in on is the intent or motivation versus the outward presentation. Denzel, do you have any thoughts on that? as being in a relationship as the FE dom with an introverted feeling partner.
Yeah. There's I feel like there's so much nuance that can go in there that I'm just trying to like collect in my head. Um I was like, so I guess what I'll start off by saying is that introverted feeling, or FI, from what I've experienced, is definitely more of like an internal thing. I see it as like, and we're going to talk about TI in a future stream, but both FI and TI, what I see with them both is that they're both sharpening something internally, you know. TI is like sharpening its frameworks on the world and, you know, what its own opinions on things aside from what everybody else thinks. But for FI, it's really sharpening what, like, you know, what their motivations are. It's really sharpening their attunement to their own emotional experience, and the nuances of it all. It's really sharpening, you know, like what do they want in life, what their values are, things like that. And I feel like uh, from what I've experienced, once again, then yeah, it's so true that for FI dominance, at least, they keep a lot of that to themselves. Like, they'll, like, you know, if they have like a very strong value, maybe for example, like against pornography or something like that, they might know, like, okay, this person doesn't have a problem with pornography, but I have ethical values around that. And so, you know, I know a few like INFPs, for example, who've said, like, yeah, if I know that my values are not in alignment with the person, I don't think they're a bad person necessarily, but I'm just going to separate from them because to be close with them is in, it's going to be conflicting with my own values in a way, and it feels like a rejection to myself. So it's very personal for them, but they're not forcing their value on you. But there are, you know, when you brought up the social justice warrior thing, I was like, I feel like, you know, there's social justice warriors, of course, of like all types. But yeah, I think that there are like a lot of like EFPs who, you know, they if they have the same value, like then they're the ones who can like have the signs and like, you know, they're out there and it's like, how can you possibly support um uh pro life, I mean pro choice, I don't know, like whatever it might be, and like and they can like they, because they are so strongly into the values that they have, and they cannot sometimes, they cannot sometimes understand how somebody else can have different values because they've taken so much time to sharpen their own. And so it's like, okay, I have to teach them why they should have the same value that I have. So then sometimes that could, because I guess the TE is right behind it, maybe. So sometimes it could be a little bit pushed forward because that's when they become like the champion. You know, it's like, no, I'm fighting for LGBTQ plus rights, and or I'm fighting for even animal rights in this way. Like we need to care about veganism because the animals in this way, you know, this is that. And they don't mean bad, like they don't mean any harm, but it is something that's very like internal for them. And it's like, and I like, again, I guess it's because the FITE like right there in the middle, and being extroverted, then it's like, oh, I'm going to push forward with this. And if you don't agree with this value, I am going to try a little bit harder to like argue my point. Whereas like maybe for IFPs, a lot of times the TE inferior, it's like, I'm not going to try to bother to argue with this person. I'm going to just separate myself from them. And they also with the FI DOMs, it seems like a lot of times they do understand nuances. It's like, oh, even though this isn't my value, or even though this is my value, I can understand that somebody else has this value. It's just that, nah, it's, you know, you have like a, you haven't, like it's still different from me, and so I'm going to separate even though I can understand where you're coming from. And I think that EFPs can also get to that point, but that's a little bit of the nuance that I just felt like I wanted to throw in there, with that. um but then also definitely like the individuals versus the collective thing is very big. And I think it kind of goes back into kind of like what I was just saying, like, you know, I found that FI users, a lot of times it's like if they were an orphan, then they will now have a heart for people who are orphans, because it's like I went through what it's like to be in the orphan system. I don't want other people to go through this because I know how it feels. So I'm going to do everything in my power and get all the resources and all of that TE so that I can build like the best, orphanage system and like help in this way and, boom, boom, boom. And obviously we need that in life, like, and so they will champion and hyper focus on orphans and stuff like that. Whereas like I feel like FE is definitely more collective, in the sense that it's just focusing more on like instead of like on animals or on like, oh, this specific thing, it's just like, hey, let's just bring equality for all human beings. And again, this isn't about FE per se, but I guess I can't help but contrast FI with like some of the other functions just so that people can like see like, oh, this is where this stops and this is where this ends. And so um yeah, that's a little bit of my 2 cents. Hopefully you can buy something with it.
Yeah, absolutely, Denzel. That was really good input. And I agree with you that when you get to the extroverted feeling perceivers, so ESFPs and ENFPs, they're often called the champions. And one of the reasons for that is because well, for one, being extroverted, they're more quick to take action than introverted types are. INFPs and ISFPs have an interaction style called behind the scenes. And behind the scenes interaction style types tend to be more thorough and slow about taking action. They want lots of information first. They need a lot of time to really pour over and make sure they've got all the information. They're making a really well-informed decision, whereas ESFPs and ENFPs have what's called a get things going interaction style. And so they really can jump into action fast. And alongside of that interaction style, ENFPs and ESFPs also have a cognitive function called extroverted thinking, or TE, and that's their tertiary function. And TE is very focused on taking action and being methodical and efficient. And so ESFPs and ENFPs, when they have a cause, whatever it is, whether it's LGBTQ or um, race relations or whatever that cause is, they can be very proactive and outspoken for that cause. And also, what Denzel pointed out is also true. If you are a feeling perceiver, particularly an ISFP or an INFP, and you're in a social situation, you're hanging out with friends or something, and you start realizing that your values conflict with theirs, um, you're not necessarily going healthy ISFPs and INFPs aren't necessarily going to speak out and just be like, you're bad and wrong and anything like that. They may just kind of distance themselves from that person because they're like, how authentic can I be in this relationship? I People with introverted feeling, they want respect and space for their own personal core values. And so usually when they're healthy, they want to offer that same respect to someone else. They don't want to push their values on the other person unless they see that as that person could harm another individual. But they will not feel like they can really truly be authentic if they have this level of closeness in the relationship with the other person. So they will kind of just pull back from the relationship. Um Let's move on to the next slide here. So this is what Isabel Briggs Myers said about introverted feeling, and it's one of my favorite quotes about introverted feeling. She says, "Introverted feeling types have a wealth of warmth and enthusiasm, but they may not show it until they know someone well. They wear their warm side inside, like a fur-lined coat." And I love this because a lot of people think, again, there's this misconception about introverted feeling types being hyper emotional, hyper reactive, super engaging emotionally, and that's actually not often the case, especially with introverted feeling types. So the ISFPs and the INFPs, they can actually look very hard to read on the outside, and they can even look kind of like unexpressive on the outside because a lot of that's going on emotionally is happening inside. A lot of their feelings about things are going on inside. They're not as likely to just blurt out what's going on for them. And so they may feel really strong feelings for another person and have a lot of empathy and warmth to offer, but it's not just showing up as readily as it would for, say, an extroverted feeling type. Denzel, do you have any input on this phenomenon. I know, like, Jamila, your wife, Denzel's wife, a lot of people think, "Oh, Jamila is really hard to read," or "She seems like maybe she's not having a good time." Like, I take trips with Denzel and Jamila to Disney World, we've done a couple of these, and I kind of worry, I'm like, "I'm not sure she's having fun because she's not really expressive." So that can happen with, and I have a teenage daughter who's, ISFP as well, and it's hard to tell what they're feeling on the outside. And so, Denzel, I just love to hear what you think about this INF, or this introverted feeling phenomenon of being very warm on the inside, but very looking very kind of stoic on the outside.
Yeah. That resting B face is a real thing, especially for the FI dominance. Uh, that term "still waters run deep." That's very true for them, and so it's like I genuinely believe that Jamila has the purest heart I've ever come across. And I like to think that I'm really thinking objectively. She's really like when people say like, oh, she wouldn't harm a fly, like somebody wouldn't harm a fly kind of thing. Like that's literally the kind of heart that she has for people and for everything. And she's just such a sweet, angelic person who's also a troll. So there's that. But from her face, a lot of times you wouldn't be able to tell that. And she's, uh, you would think that she's having an attitude, or that like she's angry at you, or just doesn't care. Like they look very apathetic. That's what it is. They look very apathetic a lot of times, but then you can feel their well, I'm speaking as an ENFJ, so I don't know. Depending on what type you are, maybe you don't feel it, but I literally feel how deep the emotions run for them, and it's just like, wow. Um, but yeah, it's something that it's like they're really like feeling like deeply, and they won't always like express, like they really like stand by it, but it's not something that's being like expressed as much. So it's just more of like very deeply experienced, but not very often expressed, unless if it's through art. So like in performance, or in the paintings that they create and things of that nature. Um, but yeah, that's essentially that's the gist of like how I experienced that.
Yeah. Thank you, Denzel. I think it's one of the big distinctions between introverted and extroverted feeling is extroverted feeling is very warm energetically. And it wants to create this rapport with the other person really quickly. And so a lot of times with extroverted feeling types, you can tell how they feel about you right away. Like they are smiling, they're making eye contact, they're making hand gestures. And even the introverted, extroverted feeling types, so INFJs and ISFJs, they can be a little more held back than one like Denzel, who's an ENFJ, but they're still radiating this kind of warmth and this expressiveness that's more common with extroverted feeling. Whereas an introverted feeling type might feel like they're being very engaging and everything, but they don't always know that how it's coming across on their face, like on the outside. Um, I'm not an INFP or ISFP, but I've often been told that I looked unhappy to be somewhere or unhappy to be with someone, even though I was having a great time or I was really enjoying meeting someone, just because I failed to register the inner feelings on the outside. And that's especially a bigger problem for people with thinking judging preferences. So let's move on to
Yeah.
the next slide. So this is a quote from Joel Markwitt and Antonia Dodge. They are the founders of the Personality Hacker podcast, and they've also written a book called Personality Hacker. And they said, throughout history, authenticity, that's their word for introverted feeling, users have found themselves unable to convey their own subjective emotional experience in conversation, which has driven them to become artists. A lot of times for IFPs, they feel like words don't do justice to the deep and nuanced feelings and values and beliefs that they hold within themselves. And so they use their auxiliary function, which for ISFPs is extroverted sensing, and for INFPs is extroverted intuition. That auxiliary function becomes a channel through which they can pour their introverted feeling either in maybe performance, art, storytelling, whatever it is, they are really wonderful at using these different avenues of creative self-expression to kind of transmit their values into the world. But words never seem to be enough for them. They often find a creative way to express their values rather than this really verbal monologue of how they feel about things. And Denzel, again, I know we're constantly bringing up Denzel's wife, but she's a great example. She's an amazing singer. And Denzel, you were saying that like a lot of people think she's kind of stoic on the outside, but she actually her emotions show up more when it comes to performance and songwriting. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. I think that her superpower, and I've seen this for other FI users, is I'm going to make you feel what I feel. I think that like if there's a superpower for the functions, like that's FIs. Like I've tapped into my own emotions so deeply and I've understood my emotional experience so deeply that now when I express from that place, it's so powerful. There's so many vibrations from it that you are going to feel what I feel. So when again, Jamila, when she performs, like she's an artist, she's a songwriter and singer. When she sings, then numerous times, like people have said that, they're just moved by her performances because it's like when Jamila performs and she puts herself in the position of the person who wrote the song, as if she's feeling everything that they felt, and she like meditates on it and everything, and then she expresses it. So it's almost like some sort of like method acting. And so of course, like when the FI user has made the art piece themselves and is expressing from there, then it's extra amplified. So yeah, it's really like a thing about like just going deep into one's like and not being afraid to go as deep as you can into like one's own emotional experience to understand. And even though like FI, like as a function, doesn't mean emotions, like functions don't really mean emotions, it's gathering emotional data or like, yeah, like data that has to do with like emotions. And it's like making like decision from it. So it's like finding like the inner alignment and inner harmony with all of the different motivations. It's almost like a round table of different motivations that are all speaking up, and then FI is like trying to get all of them to come into agreement and which voice is the loudest. That's how I understand it, from an outside perspective. And so once it's able to get all of them to be in sync, then that's when it's most powerful at being able to amplify those voices together. Like all of a sudden, like my mind is thinking of that movie. It just came up, like Horton Hears a Who. I think it's on Netflix. I don't know if anybody's seen it. But at the
I for
end,
sure have.
spoiler alert. Yeah, at the end, like spoiler alert, when it's like everyone in Whoville or wherever, like scream, and it's like getting everyone in sync to like yell, And I think that's like kind of like what FI does. It's like finding all of the motivations and the values and everything. And once they're all in alignment together, then that's when it's like the TE pops in and they're unstoppable because it's so much of a strong force that you can't stop it from there. And that's why it's usually so important for them to be able to get everything in alignment. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah. Oh, it made sense, absolutely. I think that, I appreciate you using the Horton Hears a Who example. Any parent who's watching this will be able to know what you're talking about. I have a comment here from, D. Berlin. Hopefully I can show that. She says, "I am told to tell my face," and I think this was in relation to what we were saying about how you can introverted feeling types can feel a lot of things very deeply, but sometimes it just doesn't show up on their face, whereas extroverted feeling types, they're very expressive. They're much more expressive, especially ESFJs and ENFJs. And so sometimes it can be harder to decipher and decode what an introverted feeling type is feeling, especially if they are an ISFP or an INFP. And we do have one quick question here from Tatiana Teaches. She says, "At what age should kids take this test? Is there an appropriate age?" I'm assuming she's talking about the Myers-Briggs type indicator or some similar personality questionnaire. When it comes to children, and I know this is kind of veering off on a side path a little bit, but when it comes to kids, there's a lot of developmental stages that they're going through that can impact how their personality shows up. Like there's certain ages where children are really into make believe, regardless of what their personality type is. It's just the imagination center of their brain is really forming at that point. So you can have a child take a for kids personality questionnaire. I think I've even created one which you can find on my site, but I would hold it fairly loose because of the fact that there's so much developmentally going on through all these different stages of life. Like teenagers are really drawn to novelty and spontaneity, and they're drawn to anything that's like kind of new and different. And so they can look, people who are newer to type might think, oh, well, they're all perceivers. A lot of teenagers just tend to profile as perceivers because it's a time in their life where the part of your brain that is really drawn to novelty is amplified. So you can definitely um, give children a questionnaire. It can be kind of fun, and maybe you can get some further insights into their personality. I think it's better to explore the cognitive functions, which is what we're doing through these series, and then you can just kind of watch the children in your your life. That sounds kind of creepy, but you can watch them and be like, "Oh, wow, I see that in their decisions, they're regularly assessing what feels right to them regardless of, like, maybe what everyone else is doing. So maybe this child has an introverted feeling preference." So, yeah, you can absolutely, do a questionnaire for fun, but take it with a grain of salt because questionnaires are even mine, they're notoriously fallible, and, be open to the fact that there might be other changes as they're growing. Alrighty, so next slide. This is something Linda V. Behrens wrote about introverted feeling, and she's actually a psychologist who's written a lot of amazing books about type. She says, "We engage in the process of introverted feeling when a value is compromised and we think sometimes some things just have to be said. On the other hand, most of the time this process works in private and is expressed through actions." So a lot of times what you'll see with people who value introverted thinking is that actions speak louder than words, particularly with IFPs or even TJ personality types. They're not as likely, I mean, there's Enneagram and other things that can play a part, but a lot of times they're going to show you they care through lived expressions, rather than just verbal effusiveness. Like, I'm not going to just, for me as an INTJ, I'm not going to just wax poetic about all my feelings about someone. That's actually extremely uncomfortable for me. Um, Whereas my husband, who's an ESTP, who has extroverted feeling, he'd love to wax poetic about all the feelings he has for, romantically or something like that. And you I know most people watching this have feeling perceiving preferences, and so it's not as much about verbal affirmation, although that's part of it. It's more about, I really put my values behind my actions, and I really live, you'll see in my lifestyle what's important to me. Linda Behrens also writes, introverted feeling, helps us know when people are being fake or insincere, or if they are basically good. It's like having an internal sense of the essence of a person. So people who have introverted feeling can get a really quick read on someone and can tell very quickly whether someone's being phony, whether someone's being fake, or whether there's some kind of bad intent or manipulation going on the other end. So there's a very intuitive quality to introverted feeling, which is why I believe a lot of ISFPs actually mistype as INFJs because they're very intuitive about people. And ISFPs also have introverted feeling paired with introverted intuition, which is the dominant function of INFJs. So a lot of times I've noticed that ISFPs seem very highly intuitive about people. INFPs also are highly intuitive about people. They can very quickly assess whether someone is coming at them with good intent or bad intent, whether someone's being real or being fake. And it's kind of a superpower of these feeling perceiving types. Denzel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I fully agree. When it comes to ISFPs mistyping as INFJ, it's so much. I think that Probably more than any other type personally. I think that ISFP's mistype is INFJ, even more than INFP's mistyping is INFJ. That's what I've noticed like in my profiling sessions a lot of times. So I think that's, yeah, it's very interesting to see that, especially because there are so many like there are so many intuitively strong ISFPs, like even the fictional characters. Like they really get like confused for INFJ a lot of times. Like I don't know if anybody watches All American on Netflix, but I believe that Spencer on the TV show is actually ISFP. But if you look at like online, like so, oh yeah, he's an INFJ because he's very insightful. And I don't. I'm like, well, a lot of types can be insightful, and you have no idea how deep like ISFP types can like be insightful with. But like when you really pay attention, like he's really moving with FI and NI, and then his whole thing like with football is like it's a very SE thing compared to his actual INFJ mother in the show. Like you can see that there's a similarity between the two, but you can see how she moves differently with FE, whereas like he moves with FI, but they both care for people. So a lot of people think that FI is like selfish. And yeah, when it's at a lower level, not lower function level, but I mean like lower health or lower level of development. Yeah. But yeah, they actually can be like very deeply like in tune with that. And yeah, they're very good at being able to tell like if somebody's like not in alignment with themselves. That's where it's like, okay, no, you're being fake because they have spent so much time often trying to get their own round table internally to like be in alignment like in all their values in that way. And so now once the more that they spend time doing that, then the more it becomes like this intuitive sixth sense when they can sense that somebody else doesn't have their inner values and all of that like in alignment with each other. And so from there they kind of like push things and they're like or they just kind of like can tell like, oh yeah, no, this person is not operating out of a place of inner alignment. And so one person at that table, that round table, is speaking louder than everybody else, and it's forcing something more than it's supposed to. So that's usually when they're able to like tell like if somebody's like being fake and whatnot. Sometimes at the lower stack, uh they think that they can immediately like tell when somebody's being fake and that's like the lower that the function goes, then the more uncertainty that you have with it. And sometimes it's more of like a paranoia, not all the time, but a lot of times like like that's when you'll sometimes have like the INTJs that just immediately that person's fake, like, or I know they're up to something, and it's like, no, that's a confirmation bias. You're just assuming that. And so, but once, obviously they've also developed, and a lot of times they're able to tell that a lot more as well. But yeah, definitely with the higher stacked FI users, they're able to tap into that really easily.
Absolutely. Thank you, Denzel. I think and that's one thing that I think me and Denzel should definitely do a stream series on in the future is the cognitive function placements, dominant all the way through the eighth function, because a lot of times we can read people in a negative way because maybe they're using a function that is in our shadow functions. But we're not going to get into that today. Um, but there is kind of a habit of TJ types seeing FE types. So thinking judging types seeing maybe feeling judging types as being manipulative or conniving, and it can be very much a false read, but it's often due to the fact that extroverted feeling is in the shadow functions for thinking judging types. And so, but we'll get into that at another point. We have a question up here, let me just see if I can find it. Here we go. um there we go. Rachel asks, can trauma make it difficult to determine personality? And my answer would be absolutely yes. Because trauma can make this seismic shift in who you are and your behavior and how you operate as a person. And so sometimes trauma can make you act out in ways that would be not natural for your personality type. You can develop all these coping mechanisms and all these um, different parts of yourself that are just trying to survive. And so trying to parse out what's me and what's my personality type can be very, very difficult. In fact, today I just recorded a video about my struggle to find my own personality type, which I'll be uploading sometime um, this week. And that was one of the key points in that video because I think it's really difficult for anyone who has a traumatic past and has had to kind of like change themselves to survive to find their true type. So thank you for asking that good question, Rachel. And then Ellen states something that's really important. She says, ISFPs and INFPs are listening with all parts of the brain that are involved in listening at the same time, according to Dario Nardi's brain scans by type. So if you're new to neuroscience and its connection with type, I would highly suggest Dario Nardi's book. It's called Neuroscience of Personality. And he was a UCLA professor on neuroscience, and he talked about how ISFPs and INFPs, they are able to make their mind almost like a still stream, like and harness all these different regions of their neocortex at the same time to really listen to someone fully. And that's something that a lot of people aren't really good at. A lot of times when people are talking, we're formulating our responses rather than listening fully and actively to what they're saying. And introverted feeling types have a special gift at really fully being tapped in to actively listening to what someone is saying. And that's a special gift that these types have. And so I'm glad, Ellen, thank you for bringing that up.
I'll
Let me
just
just scroll down
also
here. Yeah.
I was just also going to say with that last one that Ellen said, Dario also I think clarified either in the book or in person. I don't really remember which one, but it's usually when they are listening to a story. So I think that's an interesting caveat. Like when an ISFP or an INFP is listening to somebody's like life story, like if like then, or even if they're watching like a documentary of someone's like life story, then that's when that really takes effect. And a lot of times they're trying to find how they relate to the person. And so that's like they're learning more about themselves through that person's story, and that's the way they're like relating. So I don't yeah, I thought that that was like a very interesting caveat there that I just wanted to like throw in. And I guess even on that note, I also found that a good thing that FI tends to do is, again, a contrast. I think that FE looks for the similarities between people, but FI looks for the differences between people, but not in like a divisive way, but rather it's finding the beauty in everyone's individuality, whereas like FE is like finding the beauty in everyone's similarities. And so like FI is like, wow, like you're like this and I'm like that, and like that's beautiful in and of itself. Whereas like FE is like, wow, look at all the ways that we're the same, you know, and so that's a pattern that I've also noticed to just throw in there.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I just want to say again, if anyone's tuning into this, because I know some people are newer to type, if you hear us throwing around FI and FE, FI just stands for introverted feeling, which is what this session's about. But then FE stands for extroverted feeling, which is what feeling judging types are primarily using when they make decisions. Um, and then I have a question from Lexi. She says, I think one of my family members is mistyped. He came up as an ISFJ, but just through his personality that my family can see, he acts more like ISFP at times. So there are a lot of times that people feel torn a little bit between ISFP and ISFJ, or INFP and INFJ. And knowing the differences between introverted feeling and extroverted feeling can make a big difference in helping you clarify what that person's type is. Um, so some really quick indicators that someone's using introverted feeling as opposed to extroverted feeling. Introverted feeling is much more likely to post process their feelings about something rather than just share them in real time as they're happening. Extroverted feeling types often talk out their feelings to understand them, because when they hear their feelings out loud, it's like then they can process their feelings through introverted thinking. So that's kind of an interesting phenomena of like the feeling judging types, is a lot of times they need to have an external way to express their feelings in order to process them effectively. Whereas introverted feeling types, when they're feeling things, are more likely to post process them on their own and like get away and be like, I need to be alone to process my feelings. Now, obviously, if someone is an introverted type, whether they're ISFJ or ISFP, they're going to need alone time. But what you'll find even with IFJs is that a lot of times they seek out someone to express their feelings to so that they can even almost get help sorting them out or crowdsource other people's opinions on whether what they're feeling is correct or not. Whereas introverted feeling types doesn't really care as much whether what they're feeling is correct or whether other people agree with them. They just need to know that they are in alignment with what is important, what matters to them. So that's one way to see the difference. Denzel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, on how to tell if you're an FJ or FP.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to just kind of like quickly address ISFP versus ISFJ. So I do a lot of like profiling sessions, and for those of you who don't know, that means that like I sit down with the person, I interview them, and we talk at length. It's very conversational, and throughout the interview, I'm not just like asking like robotically like certain questions, where I'm really like getting to know you as a person, how your mind works, and then I'm able to find what your best fit type is. So if I were like between ISFP and ISFJ, first I'd go to the low hanging fruit. Like, okay, well, are you an organized person? And would other people consider you to be an organized person? ISFJs often, now you can have a disorganized ISFJ and you can have an organized ISFP. So like that's not like a silver bullet, but it's a pattern. Like, ISFJs, they usually like to have their things orderly, and they don't like surprises a lot of times, whereas like ISFPs, they're usually more like free flowing, and they don't have to have all of their stuff like as orderly. And then on top of that, since we're again talking about the functions, then I would also poke at the inferior function. Like, are you are you someone who has a very hard time, like, what you want, but it always seems right out of your grasp, it always seems like right out of your reach, and you don't know the resource, like how to go about the steps to get what you want, which is like a very inferior TE problem that a lot of, if not all, ISFPs and INFPs really struggle with. Whereas for ISFJs, their thing is usually like they catastrophize like a lot of like things, like, oh no, like I have to be prepared. I have to be prepared for this. I need security, because if anything pops up, like an apocalypse or like whatever it could be something really wild, or it could be something like, well, what if I get a flat tire? Anything. Then they're trying to like be prepared in that way. And so that's why they can also be like more of like a planner, like more detail oriented, more structured in that sense. And they're a lot less adventurous than an ISFP might be. So these are some of the things that I would like look at. And there's a lot more as well. But yeah, that's where I'd start. But yeah, with the FJ FP thing, like I think that's I think that Susan pretty much like covered really well with a lot of that. Like the FJs in general are like thinking more about how is everybody else feeling with all of this, and then based off of how everybody else feels, then that'll determine how I feel. Whereas like a lot of FPs, it's like, okay, what most resonates with me, what's most authentic to me, what's most yeah, what's my greatest, deepest desire and value here, and how can I stick in alignment with that, even if, like, and it's not that they're being inconsiderate of other people, but they don't want to neglect themselves. Just like with the FJs, a lot of times, like, they don't want to neglect the people. And again, that doesn't mean that FPs don't care about the people, but it's also equally important to make sure that you're not neglecting yourself. So that's another thing I would look at.
Absolutely. I think that ultimately, introverted feeling, my mind just went blank as soon as I said ultimately. I had this big point. Um, uh, Introverted feeling does not so much absorb other people's feelings and get confused about which feelings are their own. Introverted feeling can very rapidly mirror, like
More.
almost take in
Mhm.
someone's story and think, this is how I would feel if it were me. So, as an example, I was watching a TV show the other night called Peaky Blinders, which I'm obsessed with. But there is this scene where someone's daughter dies, right? And anytime anyone's kid dies in a movie, I like fall apart because I immediately in my brain, that's my kid. In my brain, that's my child, and I am that person. And it's not something that I'm purposefully doing, it happens automatically. And so with introverted feeling types, when someone's telling them a story, if they have any kind of a similar experience, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if they have any kind of similar experience, it's like they can immediately put themselves in that person's shoe and feel those feelings that they would have felt if it were them. And so, like Denzel was saying earlier, if you have an IFP who is an orphan in their childhood, when someone's telling a story about maybe a parent dying or parents divorcing or a broken home or growing up in a difficult childhood, it's like all of a sudden they are in that person's experience, but it's still their own experience, but they're so quickly able to mirror that person's emotional experience so they can be extremely empathetic, but it's not in the same way that feeling judgers are apt to do it, which is feeling judgers can sometimes almost absorb the emotional atmosphere of other people and and take it in as if those feelings are their own. You I run into a lot of ENFJs and INFJs as well as ESFJs and ISFJs who it's like they are in an atmosphere where maybe some people are sad or some people are happy and they get really confused because all those feelings that are around them get absorbed inside them and they can't figure out how they feel about anything. So one of the things that extroverted feeling does, which is what feeling judgers do, is it tries to manage the emotional atmosphere. It's how can I keep everything in harmony so that I can know how I feel? Because if everything's chaotic on the outside, then I don't know how I feel on the inside. Whereas for introverted feeling types, they have more like space between what other people are feeling, what they are feeling, unless they're talking to someone one on one and that person is sharing a story and they can very quickly mirror that person's emotional experience by drawing from their own deep emotional experience of something. Um, that's one way that I think is kind of easy to tell the difference when you're talking to someone and you're trying to figure out how do they experience the emotions around them. Do they feel mainly responsible for their own emotions, or do they feel this need to manage the emotions around them? Um, Now we're at the point where I thought we could compare and contrast healthy introverted feeling with unhealthy introverted feeling. Because when we're talking about introverted feeling, people can any cognitive function people can use in good ways or they can use it in bad ways. It can be mature and amazing, or it can be immature and one-sided. So here is just one way that I see healthy introverted feelings show up, and that is the kind of conviction that you see heroes have or heroic people in history. It's that conviction that will sacrifice anything for a cause. And even if that cause isn't popular. So even if everyone else is saying, oh, we should persecute different races, they're not as good as we are, or something like that, really, really healthy, heroic, introverted feeling can say, I don't care what everyone else says. This is not okay. This is the hill I'm going to die on. I am going to put my flag in the ground here and say, this is not okay. This is the cause that I will devote my life to. And healthy, introverted feeling can really be like trailblaze a path for a certain cause. And introverted feeling types tend to have a really strong passion for underdogs, for people that they feel are not treated fairly. They want to champion the causes of those people. It doesn't mean that other personality types can't do that, right? But introverted feeling at its best, it doesn't care as much what the collective thinks about something and or how appropriate or inappropriate it is. It's going to put its flag in the ground and fight for what it thinks is right. And that's something that I really love about introverted feeling. Denzel, I'd love to hear one of your thoughts on the best parts of introverted feeling.
Yeah, I've I definitely agree with what you just said. Uh, Introverted feeling like they're often like the reluctant hero. You know, like you can. There's so many different characters that you can look at in that way, but it's a conviction. This It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing, what everyone else is thinking is right. This doesn't feel right for me. Like when we are thinking about maybe the difference between guilt and shame. So I believe that shame is more externally, so it's like if, for example, society is telling you that it's not right of you to be a certain type of way, but you don't internally feel bad about it, but you feel bad because society is telling you, then that's shame. Whereas, like, if you were to join a community where they're like, "Oh yeah, no, we totally accept this and all of that," but you still feel like it's not right that you are the way that you are, that's guilt. And I think that introverted feeling, generally speaking, is more about like guilt. It's like an internal thing, and so that value inside, it's like, man, like even though everyone is doing this, like it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't sit right with me. And they stand by that because, again, they don't want to betray themselves, even if it means betraying the people around them, for the sake of what they see is to be what's in alignment with the greater good internally. And yeah, I very much appreciate that. I also very much appreciate for true, like strong FI users that are developed, they can hold space for you. They can hold space for all of the nuances of your emotions, and like all of the all of the waves that you'll go through. Like they see every emotion as like piano keys, and there's no bad piano key. It's just when is the right time to play it, maybe. And I think that that's kind of how they see a lot of like the emotional experience, and because they're taking so much time to understand their own emotional realm and their values and their motivations and getting inner alignment and things of that nature, then they are also able to now do the same thing for other people. So yeah, I really admire and respect that about them.
I really love the piano keys analogy. That was perfect. And one thing that introverted feeling types are also good at is noticing when you're holding back a feeling because you don't think it's socially appropriate. I've noticed that with IFPs, like there are times in situations where I start saying something and then I don't. I'm like, it's not the right time. And they'll be like, "No, just say it." Especially my ISFP teenage daughter, "Just say it. Just do it." It's like it
We
doesn't
love no love.
matter sometimes yeah. It doesn't matter sometimes how it's gonna impact people, you have to say your truth, essentially. And so introverted feeling at its best can hold space for a lot of different emotions. It doesn't need everyone to be getting along and harmonious all the time. It would more rather have a kaleidoscope of different emotions going on if there was general also at the same time respect for each person's core individuality and subjective values at the same time. So now to flip the switch, let's talk just briefly about what unhealthy one-sided introverted feeling can look like. And introverted feeling when it's really not at its best and you're not tempering it with development from of your other cognitive functions can look very selfish. Primarily because it's so focused on what feels right to the self, and it can get very kind of fixated on its own inner world. It's not getting enough experience in the outer world with a variety of people and experiences, and so it can have kind of a myopic um, outlook on what is right or wrong, and not take other people's needs into consideration. It's more concerned with what's right for me and doesn't care as much about how it impacts other people. This is the really unhealthy introverted feeling, and it's not what you're going to see from most introverted feeling types you meet. But if you meet someone who is really isolated themselves, who's not, or someone who has not tried to mature, who has not taken steps towards personal growth, um, then introverted feeling can look very self-absorbed. Um, another way that it can show up is demonizing people with different values. It may internally feel like anyone who has a different core value than I do is just bad. And it may not check it that those values or beliefs or those judgments against any kind of facts or logic. It may not research the other person's perspective. It may not research information about its own beliefs that may help them to have a more refined view, a more balanced view. So that's what introverted feeling when it's one-sided or really unhealthy can look like. Most of the time, that's not how you're going to see it, but it can look that way with a really immature INFP or ISFP or other feeling perceiver or thinking judger type. What are your thoughts, Denzel, on unhealthy introverted feeling?
Yeah, that was spot on. I've seen levels of both unhealthy and healthy from every type. So that one definitely for introverted feeling is big, especially like the last one with like just seeing ethical things as very black and white. Like, what? Like, how could you possibly support this cause or not support this cause that I support? You're a bad person. And they just kind of like write you off in that way. And sometimes it's even worse. Like you said that sometimes like they don't research, their own opinion or like your opinion. But sometimes it's even worse when they research the opposing side only because they want to like further find ways to combat it, because they really just believe that their part is right, and they're not seeing like the nuances involved. And so yeah, that's where like it really can become a little bit crazy. So yeah, you explained that very well. And I think the last thing that I'll just tag is when they care too much about what they want to the point where they're almost like bulldozing, which I guess is where the TE can come in, and it's like a lower level of TE too, so it can be a lot more sloppy. They're bulldozing to get what they want, in a way. So they are. I have a lot of examples because I just consume a lot of media for this reason, actually. But The Greatest Showman, like I believe that Barnum in the movie was an ENFP classic. So he has introverted feeling as a secondary function. And there's a point in the movie where like he was so interested, like his FI was still being used because he was thinking about what do I want? What do I want? But he wasn't looking at the nuances of, but how is everyone else feeling with this, like, or is this true to who I am? Like, look at what I'm doing to get what I want. Is this in alignment with what of who I want to, of how I want to view myself? So that's like another thing. Like FI is like, okay, what do you want? And then T is like, okay, let's get it, let's find a way to get it. But then also FI is like, wait, but is this the way that you want to go and do that? And it can be something as small as like, oh well, we want to get you to be like the greatest pop star, so dye your hair pink. And it's like, do I really want to dye my hair pink for this? Like, at what cost? Versus maybe like something a lot more heinous. That's like, again, like, is this in alignment with who I am as a person? And so yeah, when FI is like unhealthy, when introverted feelings like unhealthy or undeveloped, then they can be so focused on trying to attain what they want. And just like I said, like with the Greatest Showman, like they're like trampling other people. They're not even thinking about how it's affecting other people and even how they're actually like looking. And so there's a point where in the movie where he's like, but it'll ruin me. And it's like, wow, like, but are like, even though it'll ruin you, like, do you understand how you're ruining everybody else and you're already ruining yourself by sticking to this? Like, you're betraying who you are. And so that was, yeah, I think that's like a great example of like when FI can be a little bit pushed into like the dark side in a way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Denzel. I also agree that he's great ENFP character with a lot of the wonderful things about ENFPs and some of the not so great things about ENFPs if they're not healthy. Um, so now is the time when if you have a question, we would love to hear it. We'd love to be able to answer any questions you have about 15 minutes to answer any questions that people might have. I do see a question here from Nayab. Asks, um, is ISFP due to bad environmental factors? This question, I wasn't 100% sure what you meant. So do you mean, what are they like when they're in a bad environment? Let me know. So if you're watching still and you want to clarify that, I would love to answer your question for you. Um,
Unless if you're saying, is ISFP a mutated personality type based off of bad environmental factors?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I would love to answer your question. So if you're still watching this, Nayab, please let us know for sure what a little more specific on what you mean by that question. If anyone else is watching and you have a question about introverted feeling, let us know. We want to be able to interact with you and help you out. I did get an email from someone who asked, she was always tests as an IFP, but she said that when she's thinking through a decision, she's always thinking about how other people will be impacted. And that has her wondering if she could be a feeling judger that's mistyped as a feeling perceiver because of the fact that she's always thinking about how other people feel. And so I did want to address that. Um, and I want to say that for a lot of feeling perceivers, they have a strong personal value, a core value of caring about other people. And so they do want to make kind and empathetic decisions that will impact people in a positive way. One of the Some people, they like to throw out the dichotomies. They kind of, we don't believe in TF at all or JP. It's just all cognitive functions. But I think that's actually not a great thing to do because there is a lot of relevance to the dichotomies. And one thing that you will find with feeling types in general is that they are looking very often, the first thing they're going to consider in a decision is the human impact. And so they are going to step into a decision and think, how are people going to be impacted by this decision? So the fact that you think about how people will be impacted by your decision, that does not mean that you're necessarily a feeling judging type. The question is more, will you bend and do you look for compromise more so that you can get everyone's needs met? Is that like a big driving force for you? Or do you find yourself ultimately going back to what are your core values and how can you move forward, get people's needs met, but still stay in alignment with yourself? Um, there's a lot of nuance there that could be explored. It's hard to answer really succinctly. Um, but introverted feeling types, it's more, you may still really want to take care of the people around you. I'm a thinking judging type. Taking care of people and making sure I'm not negatively impacting someone is very, very important to me. But what when I'm in a social situation, I have to make a decision. I'm going to think first about like what's logical and what seems right to me, as opposed to how am I going to make everyone feel. Um, we got several other questions, and I know we're going to run short on time, so I'm going to move to the next one and hand it to Denzel to answer. So let me put this question up here from D. She asks, I test as an ISFP and INFP on different tests. Is there a way to determine accuracy? I'm guessing she's trying to figure out how do you tell which one is. What are some signs that you're ISFP versus INFP?
All right, so I'm just gonna do a few shotgun things that I usually do in my profiling sessions. So there's been a pattern for NI users, no matter where it is in your stack. So whether it be ENFP or ESFP or ESFP or ISFP or NTJs, NFJs, when NI users speak, then they often already know what they want to say in their head. But then as they're speaking, for whatever reason, it's kind of like their marbles are escaping them and then they have to like bring it back. So like sometimes you'll even see this with like ENFJs versus ESFJs, where like ESFJs like they're getting like ramped up the more they speak, and they might say like a lot more. Whereas like with ENFJs, a lot of times it's a lot more like uh, pauses and kind of like a little bit of like a focus in a certain type of way. And so with ISFPs, you see this a lot as well. Like, uh, um, on Joyce Meng's channel, she has panels discussions, and if you look at the panel discussion between like she'll do panel discussions like her videos with like ISFP, and then she'll have some with INFPs. And if you look at the ISFP video, like oh, like 5, 6 ISFPs in this video versus the 5, 6 INFP video one, then you'll see the difference there. Like, so the contrast of that whole Marvel thing is for NE users, no matter where it is, so often in your stack, it's kind of like a lot of times when they're speaking, they don't really know what they're going to say or what they want to say. But as they start speaking, then they start making a whole bunch of connections. And then it's like, oh. And then they start going on even more. And that's when sometimes you get the NE rambling. So even for an INFP who's an introvert, they can talk a lot because they're connecting so many different dots, and that extroverted intuition has to be extroverted in that sense. Whereas for ISFPs, they're more doing it that like internally. Um, and so yeah, like if you look at the INFP panel for Joyce, then those INFPs, they're talking a lot. And then ISFPs, they're not really talking that much. In fact, ISFPs are often known, right, with ISTPs, again, generally speaking, as the most quiet types. And it's not to say that INFPs are not necessarily quiet, but when you're putting them next to each other, a lot of times, like INFPs, they have to talk out a lot of different things because they're connecting a lot of different dots externally, and they're usually more interested in the abstract conceptual things that have to be explained. So yeah, there's that. And then you can also think about like nostalgia. Like ISFPs, a lot of times they're so focused on being in the moment, and then they forget a lot. Like, oh yeah, like I don't really remember like how that was. Whereas like for INFPs, they're very often nostalgic, and they can like they can almost sometimes recall the details of an experience that they had, and sometimes it tastes even better for them to sit down and recall that detail. um yeah, so I think that that's some of the distinctions and some of the differences there. Hopefully that helps. she said
I think
she
that was
said I
really
am quiet.
that I think that was really helpful, Denzel. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yeah, a focus on time, like time orientation. ISFPs are very focused on the present moment more, whereas INFPs are kind of weaving in like past stories and future possibilities, and it's more, it's not as linear when they're speaking as you'll find with ISFPs. I have some other questions here, so we're gonna try to. We may not be able to get really deep into a lot of these answers because we're gonna run into people needing to go get dinner and things like that. Um, but I do want to try to get to as many of these as we can. I've got one from Fawad. He says, "What can FI do to avoid the unhealthy side?" And a lot of times, what happens when we get unhealthy is we get kind of trapped in our dominant function or in one function in particular. And what happens is you need to bring in elements of other functions to kind of strengthen, support that function to make it healthier. So if you're an ISFP, you need to bring in extroverted sensing. That can mean going out and having other experiences, talking to new people, experimenting and acting in the real world, and experiencing variety. And the more experiences that you have, the more you experiment with creative self-expression, the more you don't just lock yourself into an introverted feeling space, the more you can broaden and mature your introverted feeling, because the more experience you have, the more depth of insight you can have into situations. Um, if you're an INFP and you start bringing in extroverted intuition into your life, that can be done through brainstorming with other people. It can be done through creative self-expression. Again, going to new places and trying new things. Doing this can help you to broaden your understanding of the world. If you go out and you start talking to someone who has different values than you, in a casual way, you can start to understand other perspectives so that your introverted feeling doesn't start demonizing people. You start becoming more empathetic. The more experiences you have, the more rich inner emotional empathy you can offer people because you've been in their shoes. You've been in more people's shoes because you've had more experiences. So, um, the challenge is not to just whenever you're an introvert, it's really nice to just stay in an introverted place and just be like, I'm alone and with my thoughts and I'm so happy here, and that's really important. But you don't want to get stuck there so much that you lose your balance, because your extroverted intuition if you're an INFP, or your extroverted sensing if you're an ISFP, are there to support your introverted feelings. So let them do their job by kind of inviting them into your life in a way. I think that's one of the ways that you can um, mature your introverted feeling. There's way more I could go into on that, but I'm just gonna move on to the next question because I know we're gonna run out of time. I've got a question here from Rachel. She says, difference between INTP, ENTP, and FI users in an argument where FI feels their values are being threatened. So they're going to appear very differently in an argument. NTPs are focused more on the nitty-gritty accuracy of an argument versus how they feel about it. In fact, they can argue something sometimes they don't even feel anything very strongly for, just because they enjoy finding truth. Whereas for an FI type, it's how they feel about it, what their values are in relationship to it, are much more important and much more integral to the experience of arguing. So when their values are being threatened, an FI type can get very um, more stubborn. They can check out if they feel like the person coming at them has bad intent, or they can get very stubborn about it. I actually just wrote an article about how the different cognitive functions fight, and I'll try to later on post a link to that. I think that would answer the question. This one from Jack Oliver Aaron. He says, I've got a question more designed to provoke thinking than be answered. Okay, so we may not answer it if it's too complicated. We'll see. What are the dichotomies used to define what introverted feeling is? Mathematically, there should be 7 dichotomies, as there are 8 functions being defined, and the number of dichotomies should be equal the number of things being defined minus 1. All right, Jack. I love Jack Oliver Aaron, and I've had some really great conversations with him. He's a socionics expert, and if you are interested in socionics, which is another kind of variation of typology, you should check him out. Do you have an answer for this question, Denzel?
I just wanted to say I definitely read that in your absolutely amazing British accent. Jack, love you, man. I let's blame inferior TI. I don't even understand the question.
Yeah, I didn't understand mathematically there should be 7 dichotomies, because
Yeah, that's what I
I
didn't
didn't
understand either.
that one I think I'll
Because I
need to
think
get you
that
actually on a
mathematically there'd
conversation
be
with.
4. I thought mathematically there's 4. It's E versus I. Or is he
Oh,
talking
right,
about the
because there's
JP
8
difference?
cognitive functions, so it's thinking, feeling, intuition, sensing.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna say, Jack, we'll hop on a Zoom call sometime and we'll get to that one, because I need time to think it over. Um, and then let's see if there's any other questions. Oop, here we go. How to Nayab responded again. She says, how to overcome ISFP. Um,
How do we defeat
so
the ISFP?
oh wait, she has another. I'm sorry if which techniques are used. Um, so I don't. We're not trying to like laugh at the question or anything like that. It's just we're
No,
not.
no, no, no,
I don't
no.
know if it means. I don't know if it means that you wanted to know, like, you're having a difficult time with an ISFP, how to communicate with them, maybe. Um, if that's the case, when you're communicating with an ISFP, it's really important to be as real and authentic as possible. But also with ISFPs, you want to be very pragmatic and focus on real facts too. If you start going off into la la land, woo woo kind of abstract territory. They can sometimes be into that, but a lot of times you might lose them because they are really realistic people. Sensing perceivers are realists. Although they have that very intuitive feeling side, um, they like it when people can stay fairly linear in their communication. So if it's a issue with maybe communicating effectively with an ISFP in an argument or something like that, then maybe that could help. Um, and then Jack said that was a deliberately mean question from me, from him. So
No
yeah, Jack,
stress.
you got both of us stumped live on on YouTube. Um,
Jack is
and
ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system, so we're gonna talk about that sometime in the future. The trolls.
so I have a question from Anne. She says, I test as ISFP and I connect with the description except for the title of adventurer. Where does this title come from? So titles are never perfect. You're trying to come up with a title that is kind of summing up a lot of things in one quick, catchy name. Um, One thing I've learned recently is there's two different types of extroverted sensing types. I mean, there's four different extroverted sensing personality types, SP types. But there's a lot of sensing perceivers. SPs are very adventurous. They want to go out and experience all these different things, but others are not so much like, let me go climb a mountain or travel all around the world. Other sensing perceivers are more focused on like, uh, let me dig my toes into the sand and really feel like all the sensations and really live in this moment and cherish every little physical detail I can possibly experience right now. And it's not as like daredevil-y or adventurous as another type of extroverted sensor. So some ISFPs are very adventurous. Other ISFPs are more relaxed, chill, and just like really enjoying taking in every sensory detail in the present moment. So I know that on my website, I think I have the sensing perceivers labeled as adventurers. Often they do have kind of an adventurous side, but I may have to upgrade that title at some point. But it's coming from the title comes from the a lot of sensing perceivers don't like to be tied down to like kind of traditional um, prescriptions for life. They like to kind of march to the beat of their own drum. They have their own way. They like freedom. They like novelty, adventure a lot of times. Um, and when I was coming up with names like adventurer and defender and things like that, I was drawing a lot from David Kiersey's work, where he talks a lot about sensing perceivers being adventurous. So um, let's see. Someone else says, Ellen says, try ISFP the artist. So some people also give ISFPs the name the artist because a lot of times they do express themselves creatively very well. Um, I think that's all the questions for the moment. Denzel, do you have any thoughts also on the ISFP adventurer thing, since that's our last question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's mainly rooted just like with the artist. It's the combination of the introverted feeling and the extroverted sensing. And again, this panel isn't about extroverted sensing per se, but just kind of like throw some things on there. Some general characteristics of extroverted sensing is being completely in the moment, aware of your surroundings, and a visceral, like looking for visceral aliveness almost. And so when you are combining introverted feeling, which is always thinking about like, how did this make me feel? How did that make me feel? What are my values and this is that? And then you're combining that with something that's seeking visceral aliveness, whether it be maybe sports or it be climbing mountains or it be just swimming or singing and performing. Um, Usually healthy ISFPs, they're doing something to be in a visceral in the moment kind of thing. And it keeps them from getting into that tertiary introvert intuition function of thinking too much about the future. They operate their best when they just do it and they just jump into it when they're just like, all right, you know what? I'm not going to overthink this. I'm just going to jump in. I'm just going to do it. And then that's when they usually find out that they're the most badass. Like, whoa, like I was over here thinking about this so much but I just did it. And then I just keep on just doing it. And now I think I can do it. And so then now they're just seeking more and more, like, to just keep on trying the thing, just keep on trying the thing. And then that's when they, like, then the FI starts to, like, the all of those experiences, those visceral experiences are teaching them, like, yeah, like the FI is now like getting fed, like, you're badass. Yeah, that's you. Like, you did the thing. You were afraid to get up on stage, but now you did it, and yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing right there. It's like it's that physical element, like D is saying.
Thank you, Denzel. Thank you, everyone who showed up today. It was really fun to be able to have this interactive experience with you. I so much prefer this to recording a video by myself and just talking to myself in a camera. So we're going to be doing more of these. Like we said, next week we're going to be talking about extroverted feeling. Also, I want to say, if you are not sure about your personality type and you are trying to figure it out, I would definitely recommend talking to Denzel. He is my friend, but he's also someone I really love sending people to help them clarify their personality type. Um, and if you want to know more about ISFP, INFP, ENFP, ESFP, or introverted feeling at all, you can check out my website also at psychologyjunkie.com. But Denzel, can you tell people where to find you if they want to get coaching about their type or if they want to get a profiling session set up with you?
Yeah, if you search denzelmensa.com, then you can find my site there. So literally, like, the name tag that you see here, denzelmensa.com. You'll see where I offer my coaching services and my profiling session services, things of that nature. And yeah, I also have a YouTube channel. So I have a lot of videos there that sometimes I do about typology. I have a lot of videos on typology. I even have a playlist for all of my typology videos. And there's some that I just talk about, like, a lot of like philosophical, interpersonal kinds of things that, maybe you might find interesting. Um, but yeah, I think that denzelmensa.com is definitely the place to go to if you're trying to get a session with me, and we can set that up.
Thank you, Denzel. And again, thank you everyone for showing up. I hope some of you will join us next week because extroverted feeling is going to be a lot of fun to dig into as well. And again, we really appreciate it. And check out Denzel's website if you need help finding your type. You can also check out my website if you want more articles, if you're more of the reading type of person, want more articles to read about type. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.